ended up going to William Morris. I was 19 years old, and the youngest kid working there by far. I was working in the music department. I spent about 4 weeks there, and I was standing somewhere one day. I was actually in the bathroom washing my hands, and there was a guy washing his hands at the sink next to me, and he looked at me and said, "What movies have you seen lately?" And I just rattled him off, and he said, "Well, what scripts have you read lately?" And I rattled off a couple, because even though I was working in the music department, I was reading scripts that I was pulling out of the script library all the time. And he kind of looked at me for a second. He said, "Why don't you come over to my office and come chat?" And it was this guy, Todd Feldman, who at the time had just come off of a desk and been promoted to an agent. He had been an agent for about a year at that point. Maybe it was 2 years. But he was really young looking, but I didn't realize he was basically like the rising star and the favorite. And I just didn't understand those politics at that point. And he basically said to me, you're wasting your time in the music department. You should work in the film department. I'm going to get you moved. Come work for me and I'll help you out. Now he's the head. I think he's still the head of the film department at CA. I don't know. That stuff's always changing. But he was over at William Morris at the time. So he moved me over to the film department pretty quickly. Worked for him for a couple weeks, and then I got a phone call one day saying, "Hey, this guy John Fogelman wants to come talk to you." And I was really bad at doing my homework about who everybody was in these places. I didn't realize John Fogelman was the head of the film department. And I went into his office, and he said, "Where'd you go to high school?" And I said, "Beverly Hills High School." And he kind of squinted at me for a moment. He said, "I went to Beverly Hills High School." And he said, "Where'd you go to college?" And I said, "Wharton." And he said, "My brother went to Wharton." He kind of squinted at me for another moment. And he said, "How many scripts do you read a week?" And I said, "Somewhere between 25 and 30. And he said, what were the 5 best things you read?" And I think I literally just rattled off like 5 Charlie Kaufman scripts, because they were still all pretty much unproduced at that point. And would have been a random thing to rattle off, but I really liked being John Malkovich, so I just read everything else he had written. And he said, "Huh, interesting." It was probably a 5-minute conversation, and he said, "You can go." And I left, and then somebody, HR, called me up, and they said, "So you're going to be John's assistant." And I didn't realize that he was the head of the movie department. He was only 36 years old at the time, even though he looked like he was 50. So that really confused me. I didn't realize he was the youngest guy to ever get on the board at that place. And compared to the WME, when it was William Morris, the board was like 5 guys that really ran and controlled the entire place. So he was a really young person that was just wielding a lot of power in this place. And at first he said, "You're going to be my assistant." Then he told me after like 6 weeks that I was the worst assistant he ever had, and that he had this crazy idea for me, which was that because I read a lot of scripts and because I had gone to business school, he was going to get another assistant who was going to answer his phones and roll his calls and schedule his meetings, do his filing. And he was going to get me my own office. And my job was, I was going to read all of his scripts for him and write up coverage for him, which is some, 2-page, 3-page summaries of the scripts. And I was going to calculate all of his back end deals for him. So that, once again, that kind of push-pull of creative and business. So I literally, for about, I'd say 14 months, just had this gig where I read all of his scripts for him. I don't think he read a single script, which will probably kill me if that ever gets back to him. Not that anyone's talking to him, because he's kind of out of the entertainment industry now. But I read all the scripts for him. He made a lot of very big decisions about what movies he put his clients into based on my advice and him being able to say that it was his personal opinion. I figured out what these deals were worth. There were some clients that he ended up putting into some very big things and making a lot of money off of because of some of the stuff I was helping him with. So he put Michael Bay into Transformers, and we came up with kind of a really crazy structural deal for him where he made probably 4 times what he would have made if he had done the normal deal directors at his level were taking at the time. We put, I'm thinking off the top of my head, we put Eric Bana in a bunch of movies. We put Kevin Spacey in a bunch of movies, things like that. And basically after 14 months, he said, "I'm going to promote you to agent, even though you're really young." I think I had just turned 22 at the time. And it was probably a mistake in retrospect, because I think a lot of people there just really didn't take me seriously for a number of years just because I was so young. But, he just really believed in me and protected me. I ended up having a really just pretty fast and great run over there. So kind of my specialty when I first got promoted was I really focused on packaging movies together. So finding scripts, convincing talent to attach themselves to it, and then taking them out and doing these competitive sales. And some of them were really big sales that worked out terribly. Probably the best one was I sold a movie called Nottingham, which ended up turning into the Russell Crowe Ridley Scott movie Robin Hood. I sold the script for $22 million, which was pretty unheard of at the time.
Everybody's eyes just perked up with that.
Yeah.
That's why writing can be really a good place to be.
Yeah, well, that doesn't happen.
Danny, I want to fast forward you a little. Sure. I'm going to put the fast forward button on if you want to finish up with a little bit about WME, and then talk about where you are now.
Sure, because that was a long time ago now anyway. So I'll give you the really quick fast forward, which was cut to 10 years later. I'd been doing this for 10 years. I'd kind of fallen into this groove of representing writer-directors. So I was working with Nicholas Winding Refn, who made Drive, and I was working with Gaspar Noé, who made bunch of crazy European art films like Enter the Void and Irreversible. I was working with Roman Coppola. I was working with this kid, Sam Esmail, who went on to create Mr. Robot. I was working with Lee Daniels, who did Precious and The Butler and things like that. And what ended up happening was I started representing companies and trying to kind of build out their film strategy. And one of the companies I was representing was Vice. And I signed them in 2009. And by about 2011, we had really started building up a film and TV strategy for them. I had sold what became their HBO show, and they basically called me up one day and they said, "Look, we have this HBO show now." I had done a film deal for them with Annapurna right when Annapurna was starting, Megan Ellison's company, and they said, "Why don't you come over here and just run all of this stuff and actually build out our film and TV business for real internally?" And I said, "You know what? Like they're really seeming to skyrocket. They were just transitioning from being a magazine to a digital media company, and it felt like you could kind of do anything over there at that point." So this was now 8 years ago, but it took a year to figure out my deal and transition everything. But by 2012, I ended up going over there and starting that film and TV business. And that started with us really focusing on kind of underground indie films and figuring out ways to put together financing for them, figuring out distribution for them, building out these filmmakers' other projects. So we did a black and white Farsi language vampire movie called A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night with a great director named Anna Lily Amirpour.
I'm just hoping that everybody is going to have a vampire movie story. So as we get to the rest of the panelists, I hope you're prepping how your vampire stories come into this.
I mean, this was great because it was a vampire movie. There had been so many vampire things that had just come out. It was in Farsi. It was in black and white. It should have been the least commercial thing ever, but it just had this great energy to it. It almost felt like a David Lynch movie or something like that. And, it ended up, for a movie that was pretty tiny, it cost $70,000 to make. It ended up playing at the IFC Center in New York for 8 months. It played at the New Art in the Cine Family in LA for 11 months. It still has this real cult following. So we ended up winning a bunch of Gotham Awards and Independent Spirit Awards. And, that just kicked us off. We made a Somali language pirate movie with real Somali pirates as all of the cast called Fishing Without Nets. That ended up winning Sundance. It won the Director Prize and the Audience Award. We ended up making Lily's first English language movie with Annapurna, which was called The Bad Batch, which ended up winning the Special Jury Prize at the Venice Film Festival, and was the first movie that Neon ever put out. And the film projects just kept building bigger and bigger. And at the same time, because I always loved documentaries, we started building out documentary projects at the same time. So right when I came in, we did a documentary of Snoop Dogg about him going to Jamaica and realizing he was the reincarnation of Bob Marley and becoming a Rastafarian, called Reincarnated, that we did with Netflix. It was actually the first Netflix original film, but it was before they called them Netflix originals. A couple of years later, we did a movie with A&E Films and Amazon called Author: The J.T. Leroy Story, which played Sundance and won a prize over there. We ended up doing a movie about Jim Carrey called Jim and Andy. It was about him playing Andy Kaufman in Man on the Moon and kind of having a nervous breakdown in the middle of that, and had a lot of fun doing that. Then we did this documentary about the Fire Festival for Netflix called Fire, The Greatest Party Never Happened, which has the distinction of being the most watched single one-off film in the history of Netflix. Got an Emmy nomination for that. And then the scripted films got bigger at the same time. So we did a movie with Steven Soderbergh and Scott Burns and Adam Driver and Annette Bening called The Report, which Amazon put out last year. We did Matthew McConaughey, Harmony Korine movie called The Beach Bum. We million other things, and we've done 28 movies in the last 8 years, and we have another 9 documentaries in some version of production or post. And now we're doing scripted television. Have 8 projects set up at different buyers around town. We have a bunch of non-scripted series that we're doing. It's really just kind of built out into a full studio.
And you oversee all of that, right?
Yeah, so I oversee just all the different divisions of that. And Janet just came on board, I guess about two weeks or 3 weeks ago. I think it's 2 weeks, to run the documentary division.
And that'll make a perfect transition. On to you, Janet.
Origin story?
Yeah, just a little bit about, how you got started and how it got you here. And then, we'll get to Dan and we'll jump into documentaries.
Sure.
I mean, that's part of your origin story too, right? So,
great to be here. So I was born and raised in Punjab, India. I lived there almost the first 10 years of my life. And when my parents divorced, I moved back to the United States, and my mom, who is Caucasian. So I sort of had this unique distinction of not belonging to either world, but having inhabited both. And I have always loved film. My father was an author and a playwright and a dramatist. So kind of grew up with him in the theater and him writing, and was always inspired by story and story that can connect people. And Mira Nair said something that always inspired me, is that if you don't tell your own stories, nobody else will. So I studied film. I went to the University of Washington. I studied film. I knew this is what I wanted to do. And I was an intern at a production company as a PA. And I ended up getting hired right out of college and worked my way up. So I was really in the scripted film world for a number of years, working my way up from coordinator to like an AD, which is a thankless job. I don't recommend it. I moved to LA a few years after that, and helped start Fox Searchlight at the time. I was working in theatrical marketing, so producing trailers, and I worked at New Line. And so it was a really exciting time where there was all these films coming out, and some of these smaller indie divisions that were being built from the studio umbrella. And, we're embracing a lot of emerging filmmakers and taking risks, especially at New Line. There were some really exciting filmmakers that broke out, from like P.T. Anderson. We did one of his first films, to Brett Ratner. And then I moved back to Seattle, and I've been here for a long time. And I fell in love with documentary film about 18 years ago. I started working in the post business with a lot of documentary filmmakers that were shooting digitally, but at the time, in order to get distribution or qualify for Academy or exhibit, they had to have a 35mm print. And over the course of that time, and working with many of these filmmakers who were emerging at the time and who are now some of the most established and successful documentary filmmakers in our space, I was just really inspired by nonfiction storytelling. You get to create the story as you go. You get to write the story as you go, and you never know where the path is going to lead you. And before joining Vice, I was working for Paul Allen, who was the co-founder of Microsoft, and I was heading up documentaries for Vulcan, and we were really social impact driven. And what was most inspiring about the experience there was, with documentary films, you can expose issues, you can change minds, you can inspire people to have new perspectives with the stories. And, I'm hooked. And so before joining Vice, and Danny, I learned so much about you on this Zoom call. Before joining Vice, I was just working on a true crime documentary series for the last 6 months, producing that. So in the field, shooting, editing, and we were fortunate in this tiny slice of June where things kind of opened back up that we got to go back into production and do our final shooting. So, I think it's important as you embark on this journey, and all of you, that you think about trying different parts of the field and really learning everything. If you think, oh, I only want to write or I only want to direct, it's important to know how to edit or how post works, and really understand the business beginning to end. And I also think as you're coming up through the ranks, you're building your community. Relationships in this business really matter. And so think about your classmates, think about where you're going to go next, and think about building your community and your network.
Perfect. Great start. Thank you. And Dan, I'll kick it over to you. Dan and I had the pleasure of working together on a project. First, I was a fan of Top Chef, and that's one of the things he's done. And then we also worked on a movie together called Under the Electric Sky, which was a documentary about Electric Daisy Carnival, which is a music festival I used to be involved in. So Dan, you want to give us a bit of background, and then we'll dive in. Documentaries, quasi-documentary has been a part of your life for a long time.
Yeah, I guess so. Hi, everyone. So I'm the oldest person on this panel, so I've got quite a lot of story that I'm just going to jump through very quickly. But I started out life in England, in rural England. My dad was a farmer. So I grew up in farm country, not really a place where there was a clear trajectory into the entertainment business. But after college, I decided that that's what I wanted to do. And I managed to work as an intern at a radio station in London. That kind of gave me a little bit of a foot in the door. Basically working for about a month unpaid, but it gave me an opportunity to just sort of learn a little bit and figure out that actually this was something that I really wanted to do. And it was a lot better than driving a tractor or pitching bales or, waiting tables or the other kinds of jobs that I had done. So I didn't work my way up through being a receptionist or being a PA. I was lucky enough, I answered an ad in the paper for a job at the BBC. And after 4 interviews that I sweated through in my slightly too large secondhand suit that I bought for the occasion, I finally got a job working at the BBC on a big primetime entertainment show as a researcher. So it was the sort of the bottom rung, but incredibly exciting to suddenly be in this world. And my career really has been in TV. I don't really consider myself a documentarian, though I have directed documentaries and been lucky enough to go to South by Southwest Film Festival with a doc we made, and to Sundance with Under the Electric Sky. Primarily, my trajectory initially was actually working on talk shows. And then I did some stuff like Whose Line Is It Anyway? Just sort of talk and entertainment. And then I ended up kind of by accident getting into reality TV, just as that was starting in around about 2000. And ended up, as a result of this one show that I worked on, meeting my business partner, who I still work with to this day. And we started a production company together called Magical Elves. And as Simon said, we produced Top Chef and Project Runway, Project Greenlight, Last Comic Standing, a bunch of things like that. A lot of reality competitions, but we also always had a focus on documentary as well. So we did the very first documentary that we ever did was a movie called Air Guitar Nation, which was a busted pilot that VH1 had to give us some money for. And so we
what do you mean by that, Dan? What do you mean by a busted pilot?
Oh, well, we sold VH1 on the idea of doing a show, or at least a pilot, about the first ever US air guitar competition. And I don't know if you even know what air guitar is, but it's when you pretend to play guitar. It's the dumbest thing that you could ever do as a international competition. But there is an international competition that's held in Finland every year. And anyway, so our documentary told the story of the first ever US air guitar champion and his nemesis as they ended up competing in Finland and won the world title. And we we got a bit of money from VH1 for it, but basically my partner and I put all the money into it. We still haven't made the money back, although it did win an audience award at South by Southwest, and we got national and international distribution, which was incredibly exciting until we realized that basically the entire box office was my relatives, as far as I can tell. I don't think anyone else went to see it, but it was a really cool experience, and we always love doing documentary. And really quickly, just sort of tell you some of the other stuff that we've done in that space. We did a documentary series called Time of Death, which was on, you can still find on demand on Showtime if you have a mind to. It's about people who are preparing to die and kind of documents their last days on Earth. And it's a very it was a very life-changing and powerful thing to be involved in. We also ended up doing quite a few music documentaries. So we did, my partner and I produced Never Say Never, the Justin Bieber story. And then we directed Part of Me, the Katy Perry documentary. So in speaking about origin stories, that's pretty much most of the documentaries we've done are kind of origin stories, really. Since then, you know, as Simon mentioned, we did Under the Electric Sky and, you know, a number of other projects as well. Most recently, just before we left Magical Elves, we did the Kevin Hart documentary series, Don't Fuck This Up, which was an incredible experience to be around someone who was so willing, such a big name, but yet so willing to really be himself and be vulnerable. And I'm really proud of what we were able to capture with that. So that's sort of, that's kind of the story, I guess.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan.
By the way, I have to say, just really weirdly, this popped into my head, but Simon, actually, you helped us get access to the Insomniac art car for the Bad Batch in exchange for Vice putting digital media support behind Dan's movie.
Thanks very much.
See, it all comes back together.
That all just like suddenly rang a bell, and I checked my email and found a whole
Oh, that's funny.
2014 about that.
Okay,
Simon, unfortunately, I don't have a vampire project that I could name, but did have to shoot all night long and sleep during the day when we made the movie at EDC, so maybe that counts.
Nice. I like how you work that back in before you you let go of the mic. Alice, I want to come to you and talk a little bit about how you managed to combine one of your passions, surfing, with being involved with cameras and being in that space. And I just want to talk about it briefly about your work there. And then want to pose the question of how do you find a good story and what led you to Donut King?
So as far as surfing, you know, my two big loves, surfing and film, how they come together. I think there's an adage, or I think it's an adage of, you know, do what you love. If you do what you love, then the money will come. So, you know, typically in surf, there's no money involved. So it's really just their passion projects. And I, you know, kind of just put my intentions out there that I wanted to do it. And one day a director friend of mine calls and said, hey, remember we talked about doing a surf project a while ago? Well, now it's happening. We got the money. We're going to leave for Tahiti in like 6 weeks. And I was like, oh my God. And he said, you know, we don't have much money to pay you. And I said, don't even worry about it. I just want to go to Tahiti and I want to hang out with pro surfers and that. So again, do what you love. I mean, that was, again, I got paid $0, but I got paid in a wealth of memories, experience, and something that I'm actually quite proud of. That film turned into, it's called Tooth by Sea. So it came out last year on, distributed by 1091 Media, or was it The Orchard at the time. And doing that passion project, that was just complete fun. Strangely enough, that led to an email coming into my inbox one day from a producer like years ago. And he said, hey, I wonder if you'd be interested in shooting this thing for me. You know, it's like 6 days. The director is Werner Herzog. And I completely thought I was being punked. I don't know if all you guys, the Film2Future kids, know who Werner Herzog is, but he's a master. And I thanked my friend profusely, you know, who's kind of just an acquaintance. And I said, oh my God, Cliff, thank you so much for getting me this job. And he said, I didn't do anything. He's like, it was all you. Werner saw your work on that surf, on that surf piece, and he really liked it. And he said, that one, she's the reel we're going to choose. And that led me to working with Werner Herzog. Me working with Werner Herzog led to me working with Rory Kennedy just a few months later. Rory Kennedy is an Academy Award nominated director for Last Days of Vietnam. And that led back to surf. That was Take Every Wave, the life and times of Laird Hamilton. So I was the DP on that project and traveling the world with Laird Hamilton and huge waves. And that all started by saying yes to something that I shot for free, just because I wanted to and I loved it. So you do what you love, and everything will, I firmly believe that everything will fall in place after that. As far as finding story, in my journey, again, from like receptionist PA to shooting with Werner and Rory and Stacy Peralta and all these people who I just really love as documentary filmmakers, as a DP, I mean, that was incredibly helpful and insightful to learn from people whose films and work that I love. You know, I get to be there, and I actually get to be paid to work with these people I consider to be my heroes, and like see their process and how they deal with people and how they form to craft a story. So I think for me, it's really just kind of taking from everybody that I've ever worked with. And this isn't just as a DP, even back to like days as a DP, and I mean days as an AC, you know, DPs that I worked with at the time, Harris Savitas, rest in peace, Sal Titino. I mean, I got to work with some of the greatest DPs and see how they work, see how they behave on set. Whether, you know, some people yell, some people are very calm, and you figure out who you want to be. So that led me to help craft my own craft and figuring out how to tell a story.
How did you get to Donut King?
And how did I get to Donut King?
Yeah.
Donut King, that came to me organically through finding out about the story. It was actually through word of, you know, it was actually our new nanny who told us about this thing about Cambodian donuts. And we said, I don't really know what you're talking about. So just quickly, Donut King is about a refugee from Cambodia. In 1975, you know, or in the early 70s, Cambodia, Vietnam, that whole area, there was genocide, there was civil war, there was a dictator named Pol Pot, and 2 million Cambodians perished, and refugees had come to the US from Cambodia and from Vietnam. One of those refugees in that first wave was Ted Noy, and he landed at Camp Pendleton. It was President Ford at the time, the first and only time in US history a US president has issued an executive order to receive refugees. So Ted comes, lands at Camp Pendleton here in Southern California, penniless, and through the kindness of others and the American dream, he works his way up from being a refugee to a donut mogul. And anyway, from that story, that's what I found when I looked up Cambodian donuts. From rags to riches, Cambodian donut king, refugee turned donut mogul. Why are your donut boxes pink? Like, these were all the headlines that came up. And I was like, this is incredible. And I read every single article that I could find about this guy. And I guess it was just an instinct. I said, this is an incredible story. Somebody has to make this movie. And I guess it has to be me. And so I decided to embark on that adventure, having never done it before in my life. But from the sum of all my experiences, and the friendships and relationships you make along the way, you figure it out and you make a movie.
And you went to to the COVID version of film festivals this year, how long ago did you start your research on, when did you first meet the Donut King from your nanny?
From the point of my nanny telling me the story to my first time talking to the Donut King was probably 2 weeks. And then 6 weeks after that, I was in Cambodia shooting.
And how long ago was that?
That was now 2 years ago, 2 years, 2 months. But at the time of, had we premiered at South by, it would have been just under 2 years.
That's fast.
It was fast. I didn't realize it at the time. Like when you're kind of in it and you just have this kind of myopic tunnel vision and you're just go, go, go. And then when you're finished and in hindsight, like, wow, that was pretty fast from concept, finding money, shooting, post, and yeah, pretty quick.
So Janet, I want to come to you next and ask you the same question about how you identify a good story for a documentary. There's, we could tell them about all kinds of things, but what is it? What are some of the things that attract you and say, this is the one I want to get involved with? And maybe pick one and talk a little bit about its lifespan too.
I mean, character is king. There's a film called Step that I'm very proud of, which Vulcan got involved with a few years back, and it premiered at Sundance and sold in a bidding war. And the characters in that film is what really draws you in and connects you. It's a story of the senior year of this all-girls school in Baltimore, and all they want to do is graduate and go on to college, but also they want to win their senior dance competition, their step competition. But each of them have individual struggles, and once you learn about their struggles and their journey and everything that they're trying to overcome just to get through high school, just to be the first in their generation to graduate and go on to college, it really pulls you in. And so any story that I've been involved with, it starts with those characters. There's a movie that we produced that was nominated for the best short documentary called Body Team 12. And back in 2014, when Ebola hit West Africa, Paul Allen had given $100 million to helping fight and eradicate Ebola. And from the storytelling side, we were charged with this mission to find stories to help people understand the gravity of the situation on the ground. And there was a filmmaker who was doing humanitarian work, who was crazy enough to be in Monrovia at the center of the Ebola crisis. And if we had made a film that was just purely about death and devastation, I think it would have been hard for audiences to connect. But the story, it's a 13-minute short film that I don't think ever in the history of the Academy that short has been nominated. And it's about a female protagonist. She's a hero. She wants to save her country. She wants to find a better life for her young son. And she is helping collect the bodies of the dead during the peak of the Ebola crisis to help prevent the transmission of disease. And again, you meet her, she's luminous, she's heroic, and you connect with her. So for me, it's about character, and it's also about the filmmaker, the storyteller, having a really strong vision and a unique approach, and what's our perspective and what's the lens on the story.
And how long, you brought up Step, how long was that from kind of concept to public viewing?
We came on board when the film was already in production. So the filmmaker herself, it was a very long journey for Amanda Lippitz. It was her first film. She'd produced Broadway musicals. So for us, it was about a 2-year path, but I think for the filmmaker, she'd gotten to know the girls. Her mother was involved in the school and a big fundraiser who'd actually started the school. So she knew them when they were like 11, 12 years old. So there was a tremendous amount of trust already in place before she began filming them and telling their story.
Dan, I want to come to you next and talk a little bit about just kind of the boundaries between documentary and reality. You've made a point of saying you don't really consider yourself a documentarian, but a lot of what you do is shooting real life and then bringing that to the screen and, you know, in series. So what do you see the differences between a documentary filmmaker like Alice and what you're doing as different categories? How is it?
I don't think it is really, I don't think it is really that different. I just make that distinction because the industry does. I think there's rightly so, a great deal of attention placed on POV and the director's vision in documentary. And I think that reality TV is a much more, is a broader, more kind of collaborative medium in a lot of ways, where a lot of people bring skill sets together and work collaboratively to do the same thing, which is tell stories. And I feel like even you know, really any unscripted or reality show that you've seen is storytelling on, you know, that is what it is. It's real people, their real lives, real life stakes. That is the stuff of documentary, and that's the stuff of reality TV. And I think that there's a kind of knock on unscripted television, that it's actually really scripted and it's not real, and people are doing what they're being told to do by the directors. And there certainly are shows that you could point to that are like that. But I think what we've always strived for in the shows that we've made is we've always told people they have to be themselves, that they have to feel comfortable being themselves on camera. And those are the people that we cast on shows, the people who are comfortable in their own skin. And, you know, their story is very important, but they have to be able to kind of, to be themselves on camera to the point where you, the audience, know that it's authentic. What you're looking at is real, and it resonates with you because of that authenticity.
So you heard it here first. I think Dan, pretty much, you guys can let me know if you agree. I think he just said that Top Chef didn't fix who won. I always was wondering.
No, never did. Never ever did. And I never cared who won. You know, I never care who wins any of our competitions, because that's not what it's about. By the time you get to the finale, everyone's there anyway. And it's much more interesting to me when things like, I mean, it's the, you know, such a cliche to say that truth is stranger than fiction, but that's why I love working in unscripted television, because the stuff that happens, you couldn't make up. You know, the very first day of production on the pilot of what became the first show that Jane and I did together, Bands on the Run, we were shooting the pilot. The very first morning, the second morning that we were shooting, one of the band members that we were documenting learned that his father had died. And suddenly we had this sort of huge moral dilemma of, what do we do about that? And we just kept the cameras rolling and waited to see what he would do, what he wanted to do. We weren't going to tell him what to do. And it was an incredibly powerful moment, which was really the reason that I think the whole show got picked up, because it was this sort of fun knockabout show about bands, you know, that no one had heard of, trying to get people to watch them. And suddenly there was this real heart and this and a story that everyone could connect to in the middle of all of it. Anyway, so I guess that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that we're not really sure what point I'm trying to make, but you know, it's all about being real, keeping it real.
Well, I think, you know, I want to flip the question back to you as well about, you know, how do you decide to pick a good story? And it sounds like the characters for you are also really important. And just to use Top Chef as an example, because I think it's been around for such a long time, and Padma's got her own show now, and you've got Tom Colicchio, and, you know, how did you guys decide the story of Top Chef? You know, did it start with, we're going to do a cooking competition, and then you got them, or what?
That we got Tom and Padma?
Yeah, where
yeah, I mean, we had already been producing Project Runway, and we wanted to have someone who would be a head judge, that the chefs themselves, even if you hadn't heard of him or her, that our head judge would be someone that the chefs would be intimidated by and would want to impress. And so that's why we picked Tom. And Padma actually came on in the second season. But in terms of the story that we tell, and the great thing about a show like that is that if you can come up with enough creative ideas to keep people, you know, for challenges, essentially, the story kind of takes care of itself. Stuff just happens. You know, the very first day on Top Chef, it turned out that we had cast someone who really shouldn't have passed their psych background check. He was really insane, and he also had night terrors, which really freaked out the people who were forced to sleep in a room with him. He started screaming in the middle of the night, and then he sort of went off on one of the judges, and then ended up cooking something terrible and got eliminated. But you know, the story takes care of itself, and actually, you can tell when you're onto something with a show because everyone on the crew starts talking, like they get sucked into it. And I often say this, I feel like story, the way that story unfolds and covering it, it's kind of like people who are, it's sort of like gossip. It's kind of like, wow, you won't believe what this person just said, and wait till so-and-so hears what they, you know, what they said. It's sort of like this kind of chain reaction of things that happen that affect each other. And you don't control that, or you should, you know, and that's what I like about it. You don't really know what's going to happen. But actually, I'll say this, that when nothing happens, you always, in those kinds of shows, you always have, to get back to the origin story, you always have backstory to fall back on. Like people have really interesting, everyone has an interesting story of how they got to where they are. Every single one of you guys does. And that to me is something that I always love in shows and documentaries and movies that I watch, is that the backstory is such a huge part of it, I think. And it's definitely something that we initially leaned into, because on our first show, we had an episode where nothing happened and it was really boring. So we just loaded it with backstory, and suddenly it had sort of much more emotional resonance.
Interesting. That's an interesting insight into it. Now I'm going to look out for that. Danny, I want to come to you next and talk about how, from an acquisition and development perspective, and leaning a little bit into your skill set of combining your MBA and taking the creative and, you know, figuring out what kind of bet the company would want to make in terms of acquisitioning or developing, you know, what you're looking for and what that process looks like.
Sure. You know, for us, the interesting thing is when you really go through the history of our projects, the ones that I think have worked out best have always been things that we stepped into really early on. And, you know, from a very early level, there were certain key pieces about the project that just really struck a chord and sat with us and made us say, hey, this is something we want to get into. And ultimately, those early bets have been the ones that and historically, there's very few projects we got into that were already pretty far down the line by the time we got into them. But you know, it's interesting because Vice is a company that has a very large and structured news division. So there's constantly interesting stories that are always cycling through the place, which is how we end up getting a lot of our projects. You know, two that just come to mind that came out of that side of the company were The Report and the Fire Festival documentary. The Report came about because we had done just a short 20-minute web documentary about the architect of the CIA torture program. And you watch this thing and it literally feels like you're watching a comedy sketch. It's the most bizarre thing in the world. The guy has a weird way of talking. He has this kind of like thick Louisiana drawl. He's sitting on a raft floating down a river, talking about how he likes to go fly fishing. And then the reporter is constantly hitting up with him with questions about how he and his partner torture people and lied about it. And he's coming up with these really poetic and evasive answers. And it's just bizarre. And I'd been friends with Scott Burns, who ended up writing and directing The Report for a number of years. I had actually had him over to the office because I had optioned a book about the son of the dictator of Liberia. And he was his kind of misadventures. I was trying to convince Scott that this would be a good idea for a movie. And Scott looked at me and he said, "Hey, what's going on with that short film that you guys put out about the architect of the CIA torture program? Like, that's such a crazy character. Maybe we can do something with it." And we hashed out this idea of literally making a comedy about the two psychiatrists that were torturing everybody. And in the course of developing it out and beating out the story and writing the script, the person that we had to keep calling up to ultimately get all the information was this guy named Dan Jones, who was my age, who turned out was the lead investigator in this torture program and was the person who actually knew the most information. And in just getting all of the information from him, and it was very nuts and bolts details, what we ultimately realized was that guy was actually the most interesting character, even though he's a really modest person that never wanted to talk about himself. And we ended up doing this pivot from kind of a 70s style political comedy about these two horrible psychiatrists into a thriller about this kid attempting, because he was in his 20s when he wrote the torture report and researched it, and his journey of uncovering what the government did wrong and then trying to get it out there into the world. So it really came down to having a pipeline of just interesting things that were going out there in the world, and then ultimately centering in on a specific character that got us really excited. And the character, like Dan and Janet were saying, really ended up driving the process at the end of the day. It was the same thing with Fire, where Vice platform that started reporting on the Fire Festival in a big way before it went down. So I think it was actually kind of a combination of Vice News and Thump in a weird way, where they were saying, like, this festival is happening, something doesn't smell right, here's a problem that nobody's talking about. And they were reporting on all of the things that seemed wrong as they were unfolding that nobody seemed to be calling out. And finally, we were finishing up the Jim Carrey documentary, and the director, Chris Smith, called me up and he said, "Have you been reading these articles that your reporter is running? There's something really fascinating going on here. We should talk to her and figure out if there's a bigger story to do." So we actually started that film before the festival imploded. And we got about 22 interviews in the can with people that were working on it, kind of talking about stuff at the time. And then it imploded, and we were just off to the races. And for us, I think everybody who got, there were 4 competing Fire Festival documentaries. Only 2 of them made their way out into the world, ours and Hulu's. Everybody else got scared off. MTV actually completed a film that they still haven't released to this day. But I think the other 3 films, from what we knew, all kind of looked at the story after the fact and said, "Oh, this is crazy. Let's figure out a way to get people to talk about the details we're seeing in the press." And with us, we very much got to this place of, there's all of these fascinating characters that got wrapped up into this thing, from all of the people that worked for the company that put the festival on, to all of these Bahamians that thought that this event was going to completely change their lives and make them go from living in near poverty to multimillionaires, because all of this business was suddenly going to be coming into these islands. And for us, at the end of the day, the noise of the debacle of the festival was a great way to lure people in, but it was really about this cast of characters, most of whom were really good people who meant well, who actually were, trying to pull something off, getting suckered into something at the end of the day didn't have the infrastructure or the experienced people at the top to really be calling the right calls or making the right decisions. And ultimately for us, the characters were what got us really excited and what got us to stay in it. But we also felt like there were larger messages and parallels about maybe how our country was being run at the time that we felt like, without hitting the nail on the head, were a good thing to call out. I mean,
I'm going to jump in and ask you one question for a quick answer, which I know is not a quick answer question, but I'm going to challenge you to do it, and then I'm going to open it up. First, I'm going to comment and say, as somebody in the festival business, Fire Festival's fate was predetermined long before. And, I still ask questions about how only one person really was held responsible for something that took a whole lot of people saying yes and taking the money that went with it. But, with a project like that, how do you assign a budget to that as it's unfolding, just from the business perspective? How do you go, okay, we're going to allocate X amount of resources to this project?
The answer is we did that one really run and gun. We basically just had a 3-person crew on that film. It was the director, who also edited himself with his assistant, who also did sound, and we paid for the entire production with the director. So we basically just said to him collectively, look, we spent $450,000 to make Jim and Andy. Let's try and keep around the same target to do this film. It ended up being a little bit more on fire at the end of the day once everything was said and done. But we just set a limit for ourselves. We split the budget 50-50 with the director who co-produced it with us. And the funny thing about that film is we sold it off while we were making it, because we just didn't want to all collectively keep the burden of the cost, and nobody wanted to buy it from us. And we had Micah Green, who's an amazing sales agent, selling the thing for us. He took it out at the Cannes Film Festival a year before Netflix ended up buying it from us. Everybody passed on it. Netflix passed on it. Neon were the only ones saying they were going to buy it, and they were making a really low offer. And then it was after we won an Emmy. We didn't win, we lost. But after we got nominated for an Emmy on Jim and Andy, Lisa Nishimura, who ran Docs and Netflix, called me up and she said, "What are we doing next together?" And I said, "Well, Chris and I are doing something else together, but you passed on it." And she said, "I don't know what you're talking about. No one ever mentioned this fire project to me. Can I watch it tonight?" We sent her a completed cut of the film that we had for 6 months at that point. She called me the next morning and said, "We'll make you an offer." And, we ended up doing very well by it. But other people weirdly seemed to think that it wasn't going to have the legs that I think we thought it was going to have. I think people just assumed that by the time it came out in the world, people wouldn't care anymore. And I think our feeling was the characters were strong enough, they were going to sustain interest.
Yeah, and I think as a completely biased person who's been in another movie about music festivals, it's an interesting topic with so much colorful background, and those people generally are interesting. All right, so
we actually tried to interview Pasquale at one point, but he didn't want to do it.
Not surprising, it wasn't featuring him. So, all right, open it up for questions. Victor, why don't you go ahead? You got to unmute.
Hi, hello. I'm sorry. So in Vice, there's a ton of insane stories and documentaries, from a documentary about Kuwait's obesity rates to a white supremacist views and like opinions and like a deep dive in their life and how they are. How do you guys acquire these stories, and how do you guys assign these like really good like people to work on them? Like in the Kuwait one, they flew all the way to Kuwait. In the white supremacist one, they had like, I think it had an African-American person cover it. So how, do you guys think about this, or do you guys just like, this guy wants to do it, this guy goes?
And Dan, I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Talk fast.
I can do this fast. So we have staff reporters that both write the articles and generate all of the in-house documentaries. We don't really use freelancers or stringers. And this is for all of the kind of news documentaries like you're talking about. We work with outside people for the feature ones. But for all of those documentaries, they're all reporters that come from the CNNs, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the LA Times of the world. We had a history of hiring kind of the renegade reporter at each of these very established places. So our kind of staff tended to be the outsiders that were at incredibly establishment reporting places. So they're just people that have a history of doing audacious stories, really pushing at the edges of things, asking tough questions, and they pitch the stories and then they go out and do them. So that's really the structure and all that.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Who's next? If there's in the chat.
Joel's got her hand raised.
Okay, perfect.
Hi, I had a question. You guys were saying how you started as PAs and assistants and worked your way up, and now you guys are like documentarians and stuff. So from getting, let's say you get your foot into the industry and you become a PA, how do you keep that going and get another job and another job?
I think it was Janet who was saying, in this business, relationships are everything. And also because of that, I do feel like in life you should be kind to everybody, because you never know who anybody is, but just you should be kind anyway, I think. But truly in this business, you never know who another PA could be. You know, you're like, oh, this is another PA, and you later find out that their dad is so-and-so, you know, and he's like, oh, hey, my dad can help you out, or whatever it is. So I have PA friends who I still keep in touch with. My production manager, you want to get everybody's name, everybody's contact, and hopefully, again, work hard, and you will always be called back. And it is a freelance business, so there is a lot of hustle involved too. So you have to call those contacts and say, hey, do you know anyone who's working, anything going on right now? Hey, I'm available. And it's really, really utilizing every single person you meet, and especially people you get along with. These people are going to be your biggest allies, and they're going to be your support all the way through your career.
And I think it's, you know, I can credit Rachel for me. Like, I wasn't great about asking for what I wanted and saying, these are the things I want, can you help me with them? And it's perfectly okay to do that. Like Alice was talking about saying, you know, I'd like to work on and film some surf stuff. If she hadn't have brought that up, no one would have known she wanted to do it. Everyone would have just thought Alice is a woman who enjoys surfing and also, you know, is a director. And so, you know, it's good for people to know what you want. And even if you don't know what you want, if you put that out there and say, hey, I'm trying to figure out what I want, can you share a little bit about your background? Janet, can you also hit that question too?
Sure. Just to add to what Alice said, I mean, you want to be proactive. I'll just tell you my internship story. I was a senior in college. I was taking this film. I was a minor in film, and I was in this film program, knew nothing, saw this internship, wanted it so badly, and it said you had to have a car. I didn't have a car. I took 3 buses to the interview. The first question was, do you have a car? And I thought, well, I don't, but I can get one if I get this job. So I said, yes, I have a car. You know, so just be thinking proactively, and I got the job, and then I had to buy a car, which was not ideal when you're a poor college student, but you figure it out. Don't let some of those technical things stand in the way. And also, you know, relationship network. It's so important. Before I moved to LA, I had just returned from London, where I'd been working as a second AD on a film, and I was sort of in between and trying to find where I wanted to go next. And I knew that next did not involve a career in Seattle. And so I decided I was going to move to LA. I knew no one in LA, and I took a job at the Seattle Film Festival, which is the largest film festival in North America. And every single person that came to Seattle, big filmmakers, big studio people, I introduced myself and said, hi, I'm moving to Los Angeles in 3 months. And so I acquired a stack of business cards so that when I did move to LA with no money, no place to live, and no job, I reached out to everybody. And oddly, I got this job at Fox Searchlight. I didn't even know I was there for a job interview. I thought I was having an informational coffee. So you never know. So it's just be really persistent and strategic and thoughtful, and you never know, you know, what path you're going to lead on, but just sort of, you know, be proactive.
And one of the ways, and Danny mentioned this, you know, one of the things, if you don't identify, if the community isn't necessarily there waiting for you, and, you know, with film and TV, there are conferences and things like that. And even if, you know, they have a lot of student access, and even if they don't, you could just go to the hotel where the thing is a lot of times and show up and just start meeting people, you know, who are there, who have badges, and they're who they are and what their name is on the badge. So there's some ways to kind of get in the space and start meeting people. But I think what Danny brought up, I want to reiterate for everybody, which is he's, you know, co-founded the film club in a place that didn't have a film club. And then all of a sudden you have this reason to reach out to other people like, hey, I'm a representative of the film club and we'd love you, Dan, to come and speak for the film club. And so you basically create the platform to invite other people And you're doing it to share it for a group, but you're also getting the benefit of making all those relationships. I think we've got time for one more question.
Thank you.
Or Rachel, you want to take us out? I think.
Yeah. Does anyone have any last questions? Otherwise, we can let this awesome panel go. Well, thank you guys. And I told the students this. I don't think everyone was on though, but Danny and I went to preschool together. So you never know preschool. So you never know how life is going to end up. So thank you all so much. Students, stay on for 1 second. Danny, Dan, Janet, Alice, and Simon, thank you guys for lending your time to our students, and have an awesome Thursday.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
2020